life change, complete deliverance, and transformation has been God's ideal from the very beginning. The Greek word from which we get the English word salvation. So often throughout Scripture, when we look at verses that talk about God's desire for us to be saved, even the impetus behind John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believe in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. And verses like that that point to salvation. And even when you see that word salvation in the Bible, that comes from the Greek word soteria. And soteria, or the verb form sozo, that's used 111 times in the Bible, it means complete deliverance. It means to be made whole in every area of your life. So I explain that because that's what God has been after. He never wanted us to compartmentalize our spiritual life and say, okay, as long as you're saved and you know that your eternity is taken care of, then that's all that I'm concerned about. That's never been God's desire. His desire from the very beginning has been complete deliverance, to be made whole in every area of your life. God wants you whole emotionally. God wants you whole mentally. He wants you whole financially. He wants your family to be whole. He wants your career to be whole and fulfilling. And so every area of your life God is concerned about. And that's what TLC is all about. And so this week, we're going to get into week 2 of Total Life Change. We started on last week dealing with the subject of fitness. That's why you see some of the workout equipment on the stage. You may be sitting next to someone who's a little sore. Pastor Mark had us jumping and moving our arms. And for some people, that was probably a little hard if you attended our boot camp on yesterday. And so many people came up to me and said, Bishop, we got to do that more often. But we had a blast at our Derby campus after prayer. Man, we had all manner of boot camp. We had advanced boot camp. We had starter boot camp. Amen. We had line dancing. We had hula hooping. Some of you figured out that you lost your hula several years ago. Amen. Some people like, I still got it. No, I don't. But we did a number of things yesterday to just further reinforce the importance of worshiping God through how we take care of our bodies. Now, today, we're going to get into part 2 of our study on fitness. But we're going to deal with a very important aspect of fitness. We're going to talk about mental fitness, and more specifically today, we're going to talk about mental health. Because you cannot move into an understanding of greater physical fitness without also dealing with mental fitness and mental health. As a matter of fact, mental health challenges have been steadily increasing really around the world. Many of the recent tragedies and issues in our world, in some way, shape, or form, many of them have been connected to issues of mental health. There are some statistics that reveal that somewhere between 18 and 20% of Americans, and that's over 44 million people in our country, have some kind of mental health condition. And this problem is so significant, and it is growing in our country, so much so that just this past week, the FCC proposed a new kind of 911. It will be, if it passes and if it becomes real, they're proposing it now, but it would be a new kind of 3-digit emergency number just for mental health emergencies. And what's worse than a lot of what I've already shared with you is the fact that often this is an issue that people struggle with silently, particularly in the faith community. There are a few churches and leaders that are leaning into this area, but quite honestly, I am not aware of many churches and many faith leaders who will even touch this subject. Often because too many people incorrectly believe that if you are saved, then you shouldn't have any kind of mental health challenges. Many people incorrectly believe, I'm saved, got a good church home, so that should inoculate me in many ways from mental health challenges. And that incorrect belief has led to catastrophic consequences. Just this week alone, another pastor in California, and I say another because there have been a string of leaders that have succumbed to mental health challenges. But just this past week, a prominent pastor in California, his name is Jared Wilson, who, get this, who ran a suicide outreach group as a large part of his ministry. Just this week, he took his own life. And not only him, as a matter of fact, one of the best known evangelical pastors in the world. I had a chance to meet him, love his work. Pastor Rick Warren lost his son a few years ago, and his son Matthew took his life after battling with mental health challenges for much of his life. And so I share these stories with you not to depress you, but I share these stories with you because I want to debunk the lie or debunk the myth that if you are saved and if you go to church and if you're a part of a small group, you will never have any other challenges in life, especially mental health challenges. That's not true. And it's not Bible. The truth is, and what the Bible reveals, is that no one is immune from mental health challenges. Doesn't matter how saved you are. As a matter of fact, I'll show you a couple of scriptures before I invite our esteemed doctors to the stage. You look at Psalm 6 and verse 2. This is David, a man after God's own heart. David, who is in the lineage and genealogy of Jesus Christ. David says in Psalm 6 and verse 2, he says, "Have mercy on me, Lord, for I am faint." He's saying, I'm so weak, I'm overwhelmed. He says, "Heal me, Lord, for my bones are in agony." And he says, "My soul is in deep" what? Anguish. How long, Lord? How long? He's like, how long am I going to be in this place? What place is he in? He says, "I'm in deep anguish," meaning not just physical pain, but mental pain. He says, I'm really going through. Not just physically, I'm going through mentally. And not only David, but if you look very closely at Jesus' experience in the Garden of Gethsemane, for an example, in Matthew 26 and around verse 36, it says, "Then Jesus brought them to a garden grove, Gethsemane, and told them to sit down and wait while he went on ahead to pray. He took Peter with him and Zebedee's two sons, James and John," here it is, "and began to be filled with" what? "Anguish and despair. Then he told them, 'My soul is crushed with horror and the sadness of this.'" He says, "To the point of death. Stay here, stay awake with me." Now, some of you are wondering, well, wait a minute, what are you trying to say? Jesus was fully God, but he also was fully human. And so in his divinity, yes, he understood he had to go to the cross, but what I want you to see is that in his humanity, he was depressed. He's telling James and John, "Stay here with me. Stay with me. Y'all, I'm really not feeling in my humanity what's getting ready to go down." David struggled with mental health challenges. Jesus, even in the Garden of Gethsemane, exhibited this. But the passage that I really want you to look at as we get ready to really lean into our subject matter this morning is 1 Kings chapter 19 and verse number 1. It said, "When Ahab told Queen Jezebel what Elijah had done and that he had slaughtered the prophets of Baal, she sent this message to Elijah: 'You killed my prophets, and now I swear by the gods that I'm going to kill you by this time tomorrow night.' So Elijah fled for his life. He went to Beersheba, a city of Judah, and left his servant there. Then he went on alone into the wilderness, traveling all day, and sat down under a broom bush," some translations say a juniper tree or a broom tree, "and prayed that he might die. 'I've had enough,' he told the Lord. 'Take away my life. I got to die sometimes, and it might as well be now.'" I want you to recognize that Elijah was saved, sure enough saved. Anointed, sure enough anointed. He prayed and fire fell from heaven. God worked miracles after miracles through him. He was an amazing leader. This is the man that would go on and mentor Elisha, who would do twice as many miracles as he did. But he's saved, yet at the same time he's suicidal. He's anointed, but he's so mentally stressed that he doesn't even want to live anymore. He was an amazing leader who at the same time had mental health challenges. It's part of the reason why we're dealing with mental health today. Because you cannot adequately deal with your physical health without dealing with your mental health. And so I've invited some amazing ladies, leaders, and doctors who I'm honored to say are part of our very own church, but they are world changers and shaking up our communities in great ways to be with me on the stage today as we lean into this subject on mental health. I want to invite to the stage, and I want you to welcome them as I name them and as they join me on the stage. First of all, Dr. Victoria Johnson, who is a child and adolescent psychiatrist. Would you welcome her as she comes? Would you also help me welcome Dr. Alicia Ellis Cox, who is a child, adolescent, and adult psychiatrist? Would you help me welcome Dr. Tamara Coyne Beasley from UAB? She's the vice chair of pediatrics for community engagement. She's also a physician herself. And Dr. Samantha Hill, who is a pediatrician and adolescent medicine physician. Would you welcome her as she comes? Now, we're going to ask them to remove that podium so we can see each other well. And at every campus, we don't want the podium to get in the way. But just because we're not standing behind the podium, make no mistake, the word of God is going forth. Amen? So, ladies, first of all, thank you once again for being a part of today, a day that I think is extremely important. As I said just a moment ago, it is unfortunate to me that churches shy away from this issue. And I am so blessed that you guys are not only a part of our ministry, but you are on really the front page or forerunners of helping to bring change in this area. And the fact that we could bring it all together is a great joy. So let's talk about mental health. And I want to start off by raising the question, what is it? Because I talked about it, but we all have different definitions, and I don't want to assume that we're all on the same page. So what is mental health, and how does it play a role in all of our lives? Not just some people, in your family that you say, oh, your cousin crazy, that kind of stuff. You guys may not have family like I have family, but I grew up like that. Oh, that's your aunt, baby. That's your aunt. Now, that's your Aunt Jean, and Jean's like that. And so we just think it's an Aunt Jean problem, but it's bigger than that. What is it, and how does it play a role in all of us?
So mental health is part of your overall health. You cannot separate mind, body, and soul. And so when we talk about mental health, it is not just, are you depressed? Are you anxious? Do you hear do you have schizophrenia? Do you have bipolar? That is one end of the spectrum. But when we talk about your mental health, how are you? Are you at peace? Are you content? Are you in a place mentally, emotionally, psychologically, where you are able to really live your best life and live out the will of God? And so you have to make sure that this piece is in place along with your physical health in order to optimize the will of God in your life.
Good morning. First, I would say there is no health without mental health because the two are intimately connected. The second would be that God is very much concerned about our mental health and well-being. We're made in three parts: body, soul, and spirit. So God is concerned about our physical health. He's concerned about our spirit, but also about our soul, which is our mind, will, and emotions. And so there are scriptures that bear out this philosophy, this truth, that God is concerned about our mental health. So 1 Peter 5:7 says, cast your anxieties on him because he cares about us. And then Matthew 11:28-30, for those of us who are weary and burdened, which I would say all of us are weary and burdened, that we can take his yoke because his yoke is light, his burden is easy. So we can see that clearly God cares about our mental health. The other thing that I would just add is that health isn't merely the absence of disease, because you can be healthy but still have diabetes or high blood pressure. And by the same token, you can have mental illness and still have mental health, because what we're designed to do to be healthy is to make decisions intentionally every day to make a good choice. So that means I'm going to eat healthy, not just today, because you can't do anything once and be successful. You can't save money one time and your bank account is fat. You can't work out one time and your body is fit. You can't do anything once and expect to have lasting results. So you have to make a choice every single day to cultivate a spirit of resilience, which is the ability to adapt to stress and to thrive even in the midst of that stress. So it's being grateful and practicing gratitude. It's your prayer life. It's problem solving, healthy communication, stress management. That's what being mentally healthy is about.
That was pretty comprehensive. But some things to add to that really is that mental health is something that everyone needs to be concerned about. Oftentimes we think, oh, it's just the person who acts a little funny and I've got it all together. But the truth of the matter is we all do experience stress, as has already been discussed. And chronic stress over time can actually lead to mental health disorders. And so your goal is to try to maintain the good mental health that you have and to make sure that you're reaching out to individuals who can be helpful to you. I thought I'd just talk a little bit about kind of what we know about mental health and how it arises. For some people, it's genetic. It's built within their genes. Make sure, though, that you understand that just because it's genetic or because you have family members doesn't mean that you're absolutely going to be fraught with mental illness or mental diseases. It's just something that puts you at risk. And then some of us also have experiences in our lives that are of no fault of our own, such as we may have been abused or neglected or experienced trauma in our lives. It also can be related to physical illnesses that we have. I think the important thing for us to understand in church is that it's not because of any sin necessarily that we've committed. It's not necessarily our fault, and that we all are susceptible to becoming mentally ill.
That's so good. You say that again, it is not because of sin.
It is not because of sin. You can do some behaviors that can increase your risk of mental health, but it is not God's punishment for sin. He has, as you know, created his son, who is our Redeemer, and has paid the price for our sin.
Amen. So good.
I think what I would add to what's already been said is we've already said that everybody has mental health at baseline. And so everybody starts off with good mental health, positive attributes. Maybe you have a little bit of anxiety that helps you perform well in your speaking, like I have currently sitting on the stage. That's an aspect of mental health. I think what is important for everybody to understand is it's our job to kind of recognize when our mental health is shifting from something that's positive and healthy to something that is going to become destructive and harmful. And one of the best things that you can do is when you notice that you're feeling sadder than usual or anxious than usual, or you're maybe using substances more than usual, you've changed your relationship behaviors in certain ways. One of the things you can ask is this starting to interfere with my normal functioning, my daily activities? Is this interfering with me going to work, going to school, talking to my friends, talking to my family? When you start to find that some of those behaviors, thoughts, feelings, emotions are starting to interfere with what you would normally be doing, that's a time when it's really important for you to pray and ask God for help and seek out help in the form of counseling, therapy, or whatever it may be for you. But it's really important to understand that there are some great aspects of mental health, but it can shift. And when it shifts and creates a problem in your life, you really should seek help.
That's good. So let's talk about the stigma, because part of where I think the church has not been as productive or not been, I think, as intentional about addressing the heart of God on this subject is, I think, largely because this stigma that, well, you don't talk about mental health issues, or that they're separate from our spiritual life. I grew up in the church, and I grew up with adults that just said, well, baby, that means you need to pray more, you need to seek God more. And like I talked about Aunt Jean, who everybody knew was different, but Aunt Jean went to church, but everybody still treated her different and recognized that there was a difference. But somehow there was this divide between our spiritual life and our mental health. So how do we address and overcome the stigma that's connected to mental health?
I think that it is unfortunate that many of us in the faith community, we think about, if I admit or if I even consider the possibility that I might have a mental illness, it's a lack of faith. It is, it's a failure of my faith. It's a failure of my belief in God if I even consider that I might have depression. And I think that we think about mental illness outside of the realm of possibility of God's healing. Like in Isaiah 53:5, it says, he was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquities, the chastisement of our peace is upon him, and by his stripes we are healed. We get the whole, okay, if I have diabetes or if I have cancer, that's covered by the stripes, but we forget that other part, the chastisement, the torture, the mental anguish that he endured was for our peace. So what we're going through, what you may encounter, has already been accounted for. He didn't leave that part out when he went to the cross.
That's so good.
So it's already been, the way for your healing has already been paid for. It's already there. You just have to accept it. But I do think that one of the other reasons that it makes it really difficult for us in the faith to admit to mental illness is there's not just one thing that's going to cure this. Oftentimes your healing of mental illness is a process, and we just don't like processes because it means that I'm not going to be able to pray once and then, okay, I'm never going to feel depressed again. Or, I went up to the altar, they prayed for me, and I should be good for the rest of my life. I should be good for the rest of the week. And it's not necessarily like that. Romans 12:2 says, be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. That renewing means it's a continual process. This is an ongoing thing. So yes, you may get it today, feel depressed or anxious or whatever it is tomorrow and have to come back. That is not a failure. It's just a process, and you just have to be willing to walk that out.
That's good.
I think some really important things that I want to, pay homage to our pastor, in that talking about it actually also helps to relieve the stigma, and knowing the truth about mental illness helps. But I think there's another step that we have to go. So we're not just giving you knowledge to help yourself or your family members. We, to relieve stigma as a church and as a community, have to come together and help others who we may identify within our congregation who may need help. So if you think about the story in John 5, where you actually have the pool at the Bethesda, and you actually have a man who's been there for 36 years trying to get into the pool when the angel steers the pool. The first person in that pool, actually is the one who gets healed. Everybody's running up, running in front of him and getting in the pool, not even realizing that this person has been there for 36 years and hasn't had the strength or the capacity or even understand that he could get up and walk. What we want to do is create congregations like described in Luke 5, when there is a person who is recognized to have a problem, that the people around him put him on a stretcher.
That's so good.
And when they can't get through the front door to help this person who is so incapacitated and paralyzed with their fear, with their depression, they bring him up on the roof. And they cut a hole in the roof.
Come on now.
And they bring him down through the roof. And so what I'm asking us as a congregation to help people and to relieve stigma is to help them to understand that they have a community of individuals who are going to help them, who are going to pick them up and do what it takes to get them to the doctor. As you know, Luke was a doctor and God is the ultimate healer, and placing them in front of him. That may mean taking someone to the doctor. But it is up to that person to get up and walk, and God will give them the power to do that. But we need more people to actively take a role to get people at his feet.
That's so good. Wow.
So oftentimes when I'm working or I'm out and about, I hear people specifically talk about they've prayed, they're waiting. When I say you've prayed and what did God say, like, well, God says he'll heal me. And they're waiting basically for God to put his hand on them, reach down, put his hand on them and heal them. Whenever I hear that, I'm always reminded of a specific passage, and it's in 2 Kings 5:9-14. And it's the story of Naaman, who is a leader in the military, and he's pretty high ranking. He's this amazing warrior, but he has leprosy. And in Old Testament days, having leprosy is going to basically lead you to be outcasted from your community. And so he knows some powerful people who have recommended that he go see the prophet Elisha. And so Naaman sets off, he goes to see Elisha. Elisha, in the meantime, has told one of his own servants, please go out and meet Naaman and give Naaman these instructions. So Naaman runs into the prophet, not the prophet, the servant of the prophet, and walks away very frustrated and angry. And honestly, I feel like this is where a lot of us are with our relationship with God and our mental health. Because the servant says, go here, get into this body of water, and you will be healed. And Elijah he throws a temper tantrum. And I actually like to read verse 11, which says, not Elijah, I keep saying Elijah, but Naaman threw a temper tantrum. Naaman says, I thought that he being Elisha, would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, wave his hand over the spot, and cure me of my leprosy. And whenever I read that passage, I feel like what I want to tell my colleagues, my friends, my patients, my community is, you've been praying, God's hearing your prayer, and he's probably already told you your resources, the people that are in your life, that he's placed in your life, that are there to heal you, to help you fight depression, anxiety, anything that you've been praying for. And I feel like oftentimes as believers, we are like Naaman, and we are waiting for God to physically come and heal us right on the spot, and we are not listening to when God says, actually, your friend over there just told you she's a counselor. I brought her and made that introduction that you didn't even realize I was making, because she's gonna be the one to get you into resources and counseling and help you learn how to live with your depression and your anxiety. And so that's what I would share with you guys today, is that you're praying, but be open to listen and realize that it might be a physical human that God has sent to help you with what you're going through.
Let me jump in, and then Dr. Cox, I'll come to you. Listening to you, Dr. Sam, reminded me of that story. Some of you have maybe heard it, about a man who gets stranded on an island. And, a boat comes by, and they say, hey, do you need help? And he's like, no, God's going to save me. Then a helicopter, and, hey, do you need help? No, I'm good. God's going to save me. And then, plane and all the modes of transportation. And it's the same story. And the guy dies and goes to heaven. And he says, God, why didn't you save me? And God says, I sent you a boat. I sent you a plane. I sent you a helicopter. What do you mean? And so, yeah, often the mode that God wants to use to heal us may be different than what we anticipated, but it doesn't lessen God's work at all.
I would just add, with stigma, one of the things that I run into seeing people of color and mental health practice is, number one, I'm not crazy. And then number two, don't put my business out on Front Street. Because people don't want to talk about the struggles that they're facing. They fear they're going to be judged, shamed, the stigma that comes with mental health. And so they want to sweep stuff under the rug, but I always say, if you sweep it under the rug, what happens? You get a pile of dirt, and it keeps getting bigger and bigger. You stumble, fall, trip.
Yeah.
You have all these issues that happen when you don't want to handle the issues that you're facing. And the fact of the matter is that your healing comes on the other side of your vulnerability. And it's not about being crazy. I replace the C word, because I don't treat crazy people. I treat people who are hurting and struggling with life's challenges. So I replace that C with courageous.
Amen.
Because it takes courage. It takes courage to say, hey, I'm broken, I'm struggling, I'm hurting, I need some help. That takes a lot of power, authenticity, transparency, than to just say, no, I'm good, I'm straight, don't worry about it. The other thing that I'll add is, it's Proverbs 19:20 about wise counsel. And I tell patients, I'm wise counsel. Like, God gave me this gift. This is my gift from him. Who gave the scientists and researchers the ability to come up with medication, to come up with the therapies? That was God's gift. So don't discount it because it's mental health and it's a counselor or a psychiatrist. He is giving all of these gifts out to all of us who are here to help serve and help people get better.
That's so good. So let's talk about the interconnectedness. I touched on a moment ago that many people, I think part of what has promoted this stigma is also that we think that there's this disconnectedness between my mental health and my physical health. And so, maybe I'll eat well, or maybe I'll work out because my physical health is important, but then we won't connect the dots that physical health and mental health are all one. Talk about that. Help us to understand that.
We talked about this a little bit earlier today, and the most obvious fact is that your head is connected to your body. It's not physically apart or severed from the rest of your body. And many of us may remember when we were in grade school that we talked about having the brain as being the control center of the body, which it actually is. And so our thoughts and our minds and our hormones that come from our brain actually control what happens in the body. And if the body is sick or ill, it actually then refers back to the brain and can cause mental health conditions. So just putting it more abstractly, many of us experience stress. Sometimes that stress is normal and helpful, as Dr. Hill talked about, but when it's chronic, it actually can cause a lot of different conditions. So when you get stressed, you get stress hormones that come out of your body. There are a number of them, but one that you've probably heard a lot about is cortisol.
Oh, yeah.
What that does, and along with adrenaline, you've probably heard of fight or flight, it puts our body in this high revved up state that makes you work really hard. It's like running a marathon for a really long time and not getting an opportunity to stop. So your heart rate goes up and you start breathing really heavy, and your muscles, your blood goes to your muscles. And what happens over time is that can cause cardiovascular disease and heart disease, can cause hypertension. Those kind of hormones can also influence your stomach and give you abdominal pain and irritable bowel syndrome. It causes a lot of things, including decreasing your immunity. So when some of you are thinking, oh, I've got a cold, and it may not be a cold, it can be an infectious disease related to the fact that your stress has even taken your immune system out. And likewise, certain diseases can actually cause mental health conditions. Part of it is the stress of those conditions, whether it's diabetes or hypertension or cancer, and just trying to live a normal life. So it's very clear, again, just looking at us visually, that our head is connected to the body. The head is the control center of all that we do. And if anything is out of balance, it impacts it. So we've got to also think about what we put in our bodies. Do we smoke? Do we exercise? Do we take substances? Tobacco is a substance, as well as alcohol and other drugs that you've heard about. How do those impact? The reason why people take them is they know that they impact the mind. And again, you want to try to keep things in balance to try to make your life as healthy as possible. And physical activity can give you positive hormones to actually make you feel better.
I would piggyback on what Dr. Coyne Beasley says, just about how much exercise as an example of the connection between your mind and your body, because exercise does wonderful things for us. It makes us look really good.
Amen.
And feel really good. It is a time, as Bishop had alluded to last week in the sermon, was that it's act of worship. So my husband is very svelte, very healthy, has been, I think, his whole entire life, unlike me. But he runs, and when he runs, that's his time to commune with God. It's a time for prayer and worship. So it helps our body, it helps our mind. When we exercise, it releases feel-good hormones called endorphins that make you feel better. So when you have mild symptoms of depression, like Dr. David Satcher, the former Surgeon General of the United States, would actually write prescriptions for exercise for patients, because it's that important, because of the tremendous benefits it has for your physical health and your mental well-being.
That's good.
And I would also add, there is something about the physical act of exercising, getting stronger, becoming more fit, that I think directly correlates to your spiritual growth as well. If you're starting out on your fitness journey and you're like, okay, I can only do 1 lap this week, and you begin to build and increase your stamina, and eventually you're running 2 miles, 3 miles, 4 miles, 5 miles. I think that correlates also to our spiritual growth, because Paul references, pressing towards the mark of the high calling and says, I train my body not as one fighting against the wind. When you actually begin to train your body, you can understand how this also looks in the spirit.
Yeah.
Like you have to increase your endurance physically. Increasing your faith is the same process.
Yeah.
Working out your soul salvation, that is a process.
Yeah.
And those that engage in physical activity, and for those that are starting this journey during this season, you will begin to understand that you don't go to the gym for 3 months and then stop going and say, okay, I'm going to be in shape for the rest of my life. This is something that you continually build on. You continually add to. You push weights, okay, that got easy, let me go up. And it's the same thing in your spiritual walk. You learn to master one thing, and there's a new trial that comes. And if you can understand, oh, okay, this is just to make me stronger. This isn't a setback. I'm just ready for a new weight set. Come on.
That's so good.
And you really, I think, can see those things when you are engaging your body physically. You can really understand, oh, what process looks like in getting better, and that pain is not always a punishment. Depression and anxiety are not, like Dr. Quinn Beasley was saying, these are not punishments from God. These are not because your faith failed. Maybe this is an opportunity. Maybe he's giving you a new weight set.
Come on.
And you're ready to go further.
That's so good.
So, I would just love to combine what the three of them said. Dr. Quinn Beasley mentioned IBS, or irritable bowel syndrome, earlier, which is a medical condition that's basically exaggerated and brought about by stress. And the four of us up here know that we often see people of all ages that come to us with a physical complaint, stomach pain, headache, nausea, even vomiting, that after all the medical tests are done and all the medical tests are normal, we figure out it's brought about by stress. One of the things that I have thought was always amazing is when, I talk to my particular patients about, hey, I think your stomach pain is a part of how you're manifesting your stress. And whether I say that specifically to my patient or to their parent, those that do what Dr. Johnson's talking about as far as exercise, and start to think about the connections between physical and mental health, those are the ones that fly. They do amazing things. It doesn't mean that they might not ever have stomach pain, maybe when they get nervous, but they've learned that, okay, the exercise is it's feeding my heart, it's feeding my spirit, it's feeding my mind, and it's making me a better public speaker, a better athlete, whatever it is that's causing them to have those physical manifestations of their stress. But they're doing great. And so I would just encourage you guys to do what Pastor was talking about last week about getting your physical fitness in shape, because it really does tie directly into what we're talking about today.
That's so good. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. She made me think of one other thing that's really important. Again, because of this interconnectedness of physical health and mental health, it's really important that all of us, from adolescence through adulthood, including older adulthood, that we actually go and see a health professional every year, because there are all kinds of things that we can prevent that can improve our mental health and our physical health. And for those of us who do adolescent medicine or who are engaged in psychiatry, as part of a well exam, we're also going to be looking at your mental health. And you'd be amazed that some young people who come into us, say, for removing stitchers, if we screen them, we find out that, in fact, they've got signs and symptoms of depression that we can actually fairly easily treat. So the point is, with this interconnectedness, it's important for us to take control of our health. And even when we're feeling good, even when we think that nothing is wrong, that we take ourselves and we take our adolescents to actually see a doctor at least once a year.
Amen. So let me pose this final question. There's so much that I want to talk about. I'm looking at the clock like, man, I wish we had more time. But, we elected to allow our young people to remain in the service today for a reason. We had a conversation earlier this week, and we were going to have our Fusion Youth service as normal. But you guys really challenged me to rethink that. Dr. Sam and Dr. Victoria actually are lead teachers, part of our dream team for our Fusion Youth Ministry. So parents, depending on which campus you attend, they oftentimes are some of the teachers that are pouring into our youth. So let's talk about that. Many of you, all of you actually on this stage, in some way, shape, or form in your practice you deal with kids and youth in particular. So let's talk about mental health in our youth, because that's a big deal, and those issues that we're seeing at the youth level are growing, right? You want to talk about that?
So I just want to start out by saying, and I said this earlier, we oftentimes as adults don't necessarily relate to what's going on in our youth's lives, but there are a lot of young people out there that might come up to you as their parent or teacher or coach and tell you that they're stressed or express concerns, tell you that they're depressed, that they're sad. The biggest thing that I think any of us could tell you on this platform this morning is really to listen to them. You guys may not understand, you guys as adults may not understand why our young people are so stressed, but their lives are constantly on display for everybody. Social media makes it so that everything they do, everything they think about doing is on constant display, and that's regardless of if you choose to disconnect your own child from social media or not. They're not disconnected from the world. And so a lot of our children and young people are really, really, really experiencing the stress of being basically full-time entertainers, even though they're not getting paid to do it, right? And so if a young person comes up and says, you know, mom, dad, whoever, you know, I'm really sad, I think I need help, please listen to them. It's very courageous, as Dr. Cox was saying, for them to even come up and tell you that, because many young people won't even tell you that, they'll tell us that. They'll tell us that when we teach them on Sunday or when we see them in our office. But if your child is coming up and saying that to you, even if you are not quite sure about this whole mental health thing, please listen to them and find someone that can help you get your child to the services that they might need.
And just to piggyback off of what Dr. Hill was saying, the encouragement, but just to kind of make it, to help you understand how serious this is. Suicide rates among adolescents have quadrupled in the past 50 years. It is now the second or third leading cause of death in that age group, 14 to 24. So we are losing a generation. We are losing a generation. They are taking their own lives. And there does not always need to be a stressor or, you know, something specific that happened, because the other thing that'll happen to our kids is, you know, well, I told so-and-so, and they were like, you don't have anything to worry about. You don't have a job. You don't pay bills. You don't have any worries. But it's not true. Like Dr. Hill was saying, your kids, your teenagers are going through a lot of things that we are unaware of. And it's a lot harder just to be a kid nowadays. You got bullied when we were in school. You made it home. You were okay. That was the end of your bullying for the day. You lived to fight another day. Now I get bullied at school. I go home, I get bullied. I'm back at it. There is no reprieve for these kids. And we also, it is very uncomfortable to think about your children being in such anguish and such despair. Because then we also start to think, well, if they're depressed, if they're suicidal, then I must have done something wrong. Not at all. Not at all. You don't have to be, you know, kids that commit suicide don't all come from bad homes. They don't have bad parents that didn't understand their needs, didn't meet their needs. You know, we work at Children's of Alabama. We have 3 psychiatric units for children. They stay full. And they're full with kids from all over the place. Kids from all sorts of backgrounds. So there is no specific type of kid that kills themselves, because it used to be, oh, we don't do that. And you know what I mean when I say we. You know, that's not our thing. Or, you know, oh, my kid goes to church. No, I'm not going to do that. There's no way. But it isn't true. So you have to be sensitive to what they're going through, because we would love if depression and things like that didn't start affecting people until they were in their 20s. That would be fantastic if we could really live in a world where this was not a reality for young children, but unfortunately it is. And so you have to pay attention. You know, if your child is more irritable than they used to be, they're more defiant, and you're like, well, I'm disciplining them, I'm grounding them, nothing's changing. Switch gears and think, wait a minute. What else could be going on? Because in kids, they might not necessarily be sad and mopey. Irritability is a major sign of depression in children. And then even for our younger children, you see them struggling in school, and we don't like to admit that ADHD is a real thing in our communities. I don't want you doping up my kids. I don't want you giving them medication, they're too little. Well, if your child is in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, and they're unable to pay attention, not managing that appropriately when they're young is going to have lifelong consequences. And it is not our intention. No one gets into this field because we want to dope up kids. That's not what we want to do. But we have your children's best interest in mind. You get your ADHD symptoms under control, you can go on to the honor roll, you can go on to college to have a very productive life. But the risk that we run in not addressing these symptoms when we see them and kind of pretending like, oh, nah, that's not it, or oh, the teacher's picking on my kid, they just don't like them, you run the risk of putting them in a situation where they have outcomes that we could have avoided. And so that is why we take this serious. That is why we all work with children and with teenagers, because we see these things. And it is not a failure of faith in parenting, and I cannot stress that enough, because I think that fear and that defensiveness comes from saying, if my child needs mental health care, that must mean that I haven't done my job as a parent. That's not at all what it means. We can't take your place as their parents. We're here to come alongside and help you ensure the best outcome for them.
So I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the fact that this is Suicide Prevention Month. And when we get, the information that we often receive is so skewed, and it's important for you to know that there are more young people who take their lives from suicide than those who die in homicide. And just for any young person who might be sitting in the room and any of their caretakers, I want you to know, if you are ever concerned about suicide or if you ever want to talk, you can actually dial a number that's 1-800-273-TALK, T-A-L-K. Again, that's 1-800-273-TALK, and that's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. When we think about, again, does this happen in our communities, we kept the young people here from grades 6 to 12 for a very important reason. Again, suicide is a leading cause of death. In the Black community, it's third. In the white community, it's second. But our kids are experiencing this too. In our schools, they actually survey our young people through something that's called a youth risk behavior survey. And one of the questions they ask young people is, in the past 12 months, have you ever had 2 weeks or more of sustained hopelessness and despair such that you could not carry on with your daily activities? 32% of young people between the ages of, between grades 6 and 12 reported yes. 17% had then gone on to say that they had actually contemplated suicide, and 3% of them had actually had a suicide attempt. Now, we don't want you all to think that adolescent or child mental health is all about suicide. It clearly is the leading cause of mental health death for young people. But when we start thinking about when mental health presents itself, about 50% of people will have mental health symptoms that signify that they're having a disorder by the time that they are 14. And by the time an individual is 24 years of age, 75% of individuals will have expressed in some way, shape, or form a mental health disorder. So adolescence in childhood is really key. This is when we start to see the signs and symptoms of disease. But there's also hope, because it's also the best time to catch these mental health illnesses, help people cope, and help people deal with stress. Surround them with professionals who can help them, as well as family and community. Because again, the church has a very important role in helping people who are struggling with mental health illnesses.
So I will just kind of echo what's already been said, that our young people are facing tremendous challenges, like physical activity. It's so important, especially for young kids. That gets shorter and shorter, and that's an outlet. When my kids get home from school, they want to take their book bags, throw them down, and go outside and play. We like to get home, take our shoes off, relax, maybe watch some TV or listen to the radio, but we want to relax, and our children have less time for physical activity. Social media has been a firestorm for many children. We talked about cyberbullying. So you get in a fight at school, and it's broadcast on YouTube, so everybody sees it. And so people will post things, and they'll text you things, so you can't get away from the bullying issues that were not the same problems that we had growing up. There's issues just with academic pressures. So the expectation My 5-year-old needs to come to kindergarten knowing how to read as opposed to learning how to read and learning ABCs in kindergarten and really working on reading in first grade. So the expectations is to meet these academic benchmarks much more quickly than we did in our age of growing up. So they have a lot of pressure. So we can't just say, what you got going on? Somebody said something mean to you, you didn't like it? They are having tremendous difficulty, and we need to take those things seriously. And when we see signs, even if our children, we try and engage in a conversation, and they don't really say much to let us know anything, if you see that your child is wanting to avoid school, that every morning it's a fight because their head's hurting, their stomach's hurting, they just don't feel well, they don't want to go to school. They don't have a fever, they don't necessarily look sick, but they look uncomfortable to you, and they keep saying they don't want to go to school. Or if they are, in the summertime, they've got on long sleeves and they've got on pants, they could be cutting. That's engaging in self-injurious behavior. They're irritable and angry all the time, or they're sleeping too much and they don't want to hang out with friends anymore, they're withdrawn and isolative. These are signs that we have to pay attention to. And the Bible says in James 2:17, faith without works is dead. So what that means is we have to activate our faith and walk this thing out. So when we see something, then we do something, irrespective of what our children say. So that means you call the pediatrician or the family practice doctor and you say, hey, I'm concerned my child is doing X, Y, and Z. Can we just come in and talk? Or you call the back of your insurance card to get the names and numbers of therapists or psychiatrists in your area, or just go on the website. Or you talk to a friend, a trusted friend, about what your concerns are while you're praying, because you can do both. Jesus and therapy and psychiatry all go together. So that is important. When you see something, do something.
That's so good. Yes.
So Dr. Cox touched on this just briefly in the context of some of our younger children, but I kind of want to make it explicitly clear. The academic pressures, as you guys know, do extend throughout education. And for many of you guys are the parents, caretakers of young people that are very successful academically. I encourage you to talk to your young people, because there are a lot of those that might be in those top classes of IB, AP, honors, whatever your schools may have. And even though they're getting those A's and they're performing well, the anxiety at which they're functioning at, even through 6th through 12th grade, is enormous and is actually unhealthy. And so even though right now you might not be seeing the signs manifest physically or academically, that anxiety will likely persist regarding their academic performance to college and beyond, or military and beyond, or whatever it is that they plan to do with their lives. And it's important for us to recognize these signs early, because there's help for that too. And so I just wanted to make sure that we know that mental health, we've been talking a lot about depression and suicide, but anxiety is another thing. And I can tell you, Dr. Johnson and I, as two of the fusion teachers, see a lot of young people that look very well acclimated to life, but they are very anxious. And that's sitting here in this church at these 7-Elevens. We see that. So just check in with your young people that are that appear to be doing well as well.
Amen. I hope you were blessed. Amen.